The moment my stepmother told the server to skip me when pouring champagne at my father's retirement dinner, I didn't flinch. I didn't reach for my glass. I didn't say a word. I just watched the server hesitate. That tiny pause where he clearly knew something was off. And then move on to my half-sister as if I wasn't sitting 3 feet away. My father noticed. He saw it happen. He looked at me, then back at his wife, and said nothing. That was the moment I understood something I had been refusing to understand for years. This was never going to change. Not with more patience. Not with more grace. Not with more of me showing up and pretending the table was big enough for all of us. What nobody in that room knew, what my father had never once bothered to ask, was that the restaurant hosting his retirement party, the one he had bragged about to every colleague for 3 months, the one with the private dining room and the chef he'd read about in a magazine, was a restaurant I owned. Not managed. Not worked at. Owned. The look on his face when he found out is something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. But before I get to that, you need to understand how we got there. My name is Alara. I'm 31 years old. And that dinner was the night I finally stopped making myself invisible for people who had decided a long time ago that I was worth less than the daughter they actually wanted. My father remarried when I was 9. I know that sentence sounds like the beginning of a certain kind of story, and honestly, it is. My stepmother, a woman I will call by what she insisted I call her, which was her first name, never Mom, moved into our house in Tucson with her daughter, who was 7, and immediately began the project of reorganizing the family hierarchy. Not loudly. She wasn't cruel in any obvious way. There were no dramatic scenes, no evil stepmother moments you could point to and say, there, that's where it started. It was quieter than that. It was in which child's school play she drove to. It was in which daughter's painting went on the refrigerator, and which one got left in a folder on the counter. It was in the way she said, "our girls," and always seemed to mean one. My father let it happen. I think he told himself he was keeping the peace. I think he told himself that my stepmother's daughter needed more support, more encouragement, more visible love, because she had come from a harder situation, a messy divorce, a father who'd checked out. And maybe that was true, but that reasoning only works if it doesn't come at someone else's expense. It came at mine. I was a good student. I was quiet and organized and didn't cause problems. In the Miller family, in my family, that made me easy to overlook. There's a particular cruelty in being low maintenance. People mistake it for not needing anything. I remember sitting at the kitchen table when I was 12 with a letter from my school. I'd been selected for a regional science competition, one of 4 students in my district. My father was helping my half-sister with a poster project when I slid the letter across to him. He glanced at it. He said, "That's great, Elle," and turned back to the glue and the construction paper. By the end of the night, the letter was still on the table. Nobody had asked what the competition was, when it was, whether I needed anything to prepare. I put it in my backpack and never mentioned it again. That was the last time I volunteered something I was proud of at the family dinner table. I don't say this for sympathy. I say it because those small moments add up. They calcify into a belief you carry around in your chest without realizing it. That your accomplishments are inconveniences. That your presence is tolerated rather than wanted. That the kindest thing you can do for everyone is take up less space. I got good at taking up less space. By the time I left for college in Phoenix, I had learned to keep my life private. Not secretive. I wasn't hiding anything, but I had stopped expecting my family to be interested in the details. I called on Sunday evenings. I kept the conversations general. I visited for Thanksgiving and Christmas, sat through meals where my half-sister's career marketing was discussed with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for moon landings, and nodded along when my stepmother mentioned casually that she'd seen a job listing that might suit me. Something stable, something with benefits. I didn't correct her assumption that I needed job listings. I didn't tell her about the business I'd been building since I was 24. I let the assumption sit there, and I went home. The restaurant business is not glamorous from the inside. People who love food think they want to be in the industry, and then they spend 1 week during a Saturday dinner rush and reconsider. I worked in kitchens starting at 19 prep cook, then line, then front of house, because I was better with logistics than I expected. I watched how operations worked, where money leaked, where owners made decisions from ego instead of sense, I watched good restaurants close because the people running them loved cooking more than they understood business. I paid attention. When I was 24, I took out a small business loan, found a space in a neighborhood that was 3 years away from being desirable, and opened a 38-seat restaurant called Birch. The concept was simple, seasonal American, prix-fixe on weekends, a la carte Tuesday through Thursday. The execution was not simple at all. The first year nearly ended me. I had months where I paid my staff before I paid myself, where I survived on the bread we made in-house and whatever the kitchen had left it close. I kept a spreadsheet of every decision I regretted and forced myself to read it before making new ones. But I paid attention and I adapted, and Birch survived its first year. Then its second. By year 3, we had a 6-week wait for weekend reservations and a write-up in a regional food magazine that used the phrase quietly exceptional. I framed that piece of paper and hung it in my office where no one but me would see it. I opened a second location at 28, a third at 30. By the time my father's retirement was being planned, I owned 3 restaurants in the greater Phoenix area, had 41 employees, and had been nominated for a regional James Beard Award in the Emerging Chef category. Not because I was still cooking line, but because the committee recognized the vision behind the food program I built. My father didn't know any of this. My stepmother didn't know. My half-sister didn't know. My half-sister didn't know. Not because I hid it from them, but because not one of them had ever asked, with any real curiosity, what I did for work. When my father called on the rare Sunday I picked up, he'd ask how things were going and I'd say, busy. And he'd say, that's good, and we'd talk about his golf game for 12 minutes and hang up. Nobody asked what busy meant. Nobody asked what I was building. The assumption was that I was doing fine, which in our family meant not their problem, and that was enough for them. So when my stepmother's assistant contacted a restaurant called Birch to book a private dining room for a retirement party for 32 guests, she had no idea who owned it. Why would she? The ownership wasn't printed on the menu. My name wasn't on the website. I'd been invisible in my family for so long that I was invisible everywhere to them. I found out 3 days before the event. My general manager flagged it when she noticed the guest name on the reservation paperwork. I think this might be your dad, she said, showing me the form. I looked at the date, the head count, the name. It was. I could have called. I could have mentioned it, turned it into a small family moment, let my stepmother make a fuss about what a coincidence it was. But I thought about every Sunday phone call where my work went unmentioned. I thought about the champagne. I thought about 12-year-old me and the letter on the kitchen table. I decided to let the dinner happen. My team didn't know the full context, just that this was a personal event for me and I wanted everything to be exactly right. We ran the private room the way we always did. Precise, warm, unhurried. I stayed in the building. I didn't seat myself at the table. I wasn't a guest. I moved through the kitchen and the service corridor the way I always did on a Saturday night, watching the room through the narrow window in the service door, tracking the rhythm of the table, the timing of courses. I saw the moment my stepmother told the server to skip me. I was already inside by then, having slipped into my seat at the end of the table during the commotion of everyone arriving. She leaned over and said something to the server. Quiet. The kind of quiet that's meant to be unheard but isn't quite. And the server, a 23-year-old named Marcus who had been working for me for 8 months, looked at me, looked at her, and made the choice she asked him to make. Later he apologized, privately, and I told him he'd done nothing wrong. He didn't know what he didn't know, what he didn't know. I sat with my champagne glass empty and watched my father not say anything, and something in me went still. Not the still of suppressing emotion, the still of a decision being made. The dinner was beautiful. I know because I built it. The bread course came out exactly as I'd expected months ago. 3 varieties, cultured butter, a smoked salt that took us 4 batches to get right. The fish was pristine. The main had a sauce that my chef had been developing for 6 weeks and had finally gotten exactly right. I watched my father eat it. I watched him say something to the man next to him, clearly complimenting it, and I thought, you are eating my work right now. You just don't know it yet. Speeches started after the main course. My father's colleague from his engineering firm spoke first. Then his department head, a man who'd known him for 20 years. They talked about his career with genuine warmth, and I felt something complicated in my chest. Grief, maybe. For the version of him I still wanted to exist. My stepmother cried a little. My half-sister reached over and squeezed her mother's hand. Then my stepmother stood. She spoke about what my father meant to their family. She said the word family 11 times. I counted. She said she was grateful for the life they had built together, the daughter they had raised, the home they had made. She thanked various people at the table. She did not mention me. I was sitting 7 seats away. She looked past me twice while she spoke. Both times felt deliberate. When she sat down, my father caught my eye. For a moment, I thought he was going to say something, acknowledge me, at minimum. But then the table shifted into the noise of dessert arriving, and the moment passed. That was enough. I excused myself quietly, walked through the dining room, through the hallway, through the kitchen, to my office in the back. I sat for about 40 seconds. Then I picked up my phone and texted my general manager. I'm going to say a few words before dessert goes out. Please hold the cheesecake course for 5 minutes. She texted back, got it. Are you okay? I texted, yes. I went to the restroom, checked my face in the mirror, and walked back out to the private room. The table was mid-conversation when I came back in. I didn't wait for a pause. I stepped to the open end of the table, near the head where my father was sitting, and I spoke clearly enough to be heard by everyone. I want to add something before dessert, I said. I hope you'll indulge me. The room went quiet. My stepmother looked at me the way she had always looked at me when I did something unexpected. A slight narrowing, the calculation of whether this was going to be a problem. Most of you know me as my father's daughter, I said. The quiet one. The one who moved to Phoenix and works in food, as my stepmother likes to say. I paused. A few people smiled, assuming this was a gentle preamble to a toast. What you might not know is that the restaurant you're sitting in tonight is mine. I own Birch. I opened it 7 years ago. This is one of 3 restaurants I operate in the Phoenix area. The room did what rooms do when a fact arrives that doesn't fit the existing map of the world. It went very quiet, and then it got loud with the kind of noise that comes when 30 people are trying to process the same information at the same time. My father's face. I want to describe it accurately because it matters. It wasn't shame, not at first. It was something more pure, complete absence of the ability to respond. Like a system encountering a variable it hadn't been written to handle. His mouth opened slightly. He looked at me, then at the room around him, the room I had built, the food he had eaten, the service that had made this evening feel effortless, and something reconfigured in his expression. My stepmother's face was something different. It was the face of someone who has just understood that a mistake has been made and who is rapidly trying to decide whether the mistake is acknowledged or managed. I didn't let her decide. I wanted tonight to be perfect for you, Dad, I said, and I think it was. My team spent weeks on this event. I hope you enjoyed the food. I looked at him directly. I would have loved to tell you sooner, but you never asked. I sat down. The table stayed quiet for a long moment. Then one of my father's colleagues, a man named Jeffrey who had apparently attended a charity event at Birch 18 months ago, said, "Wait, you're the owner of Birch? We've been trying to get a reservation there for months." He said it with genuine delight, the kind of reaction I'd learned to accept gracefully. I thanked him. The dam broke after that. Questions came from several directions. People had opinions about the salmon. Someone wanted to know how I'd gotten into the industry. My father's apartment head shook my hand. The room had shifted into something I hadn't entirely expected. Not uncomfortable, but reordered. The table's axis had moved. My stepmother said nothing for the rest of the evening. My half-sister lifted her phone. My father didn't speak directly to me until the party began to break up. Guests collecting coats and saying their goodbyes. He came to where I was standing near the entrance of the private room, and he stopped in front of me. And for a moment, he just looked at me like he was trying to find the version of me he recognized inside the version standing in front of him. "Why didn't you tell me?" he said. It was such a simple question. It sounded like her feelings. I thought about the champagne. I thought about the letter on the table. I thought about 12 minutes of golf and a Sunday phone call. "When would I have told you?" I said. "When would you have asked?" He didn't answer. I wasn't trying to wound him, but I also wasn't going to pretend the question didn't have an answer. He knew the answer. He had always known on some level that he had not paid attention. People who don't pay attention generally know it, even when they don't say so. I'm proud of what he's built, he said finally. The words came out stiff, like they'd been waiting a long time to be used and had gone a little rusty. Thank you, I said. That means something. It meant something, and it wasn't enough, and both of those things were true at the same time. He left with my stepmother a few minutes later. She didn't speak to me on the way out. As she passed, she said, to no one in particular, that it had been a lovely evening. She did not look at me when she said it. My half-sister, to her credit, stopped. She's 29. We've never been close, but we've never been enemies either. We've mostly just been people who grew up in the same house and have very little in common. She stopped in front of me and she said, I didn't know any of that. About the restaurants. She paused. I should have asked. It was 3 words beyond what I expected. I told her I appreciated that. The cleanup after a private event has its own particular rhythm. Efficient, methodical, the gradual return of a space to its neutral state. I stayed for all of it, not because I needed to, but because I always did. Because this was my place and I liked seeing it at close, in the quiet after everyone was gone, when it was just the low hum of the kitchen equipment and the sound of chairs being reset. My general manager found me in the office around 11:30. How are you doing? She asked. Complicated, I said. She nodded. She didn't push. She'd been working with me for 4 years and she had excellent instincts about when to press and when to just be present. She poured 2 small glasses from the half bottle of Riesling we'd opened for service and set one in front of me. For what it's worth, she said, the table was immaculate tonight. It was, I agreed. Thank you. My father called 3 days later. Not a text, an actual call, which was unusual enough that I almost didn't pick up. I stepped outside my office into the back alley behind the restaurant and answered. He started with small talk, and I let him, because he needed it to get wherever he was going. Then he said he'd been thinking about what I'd said, about when would I have told him, when would he have asked. He said he hadn't had a good answer, and he'd been sitting with that. I waited. I think I told myself you were fine, he said. You always seemed fine. You didn't ask for anything. You didn't complain. I think I used that as a reason not to look closer. He paused. That wasn't fair to you. I thought about saying, no, it wasn't. I thought about cataloging every Sunday call, every dinner where I went unmentioned, every year he didn't know what city I was building something in. I thought about the champagne glass. Instead, I said, I know. I'd like to come see the restaurant, he said. If that's okay, I'd like to actually see what you've built. It was a small thing. It was also the first time he had ever asked with any real intention behind it to come into my life. I can get you a table, I said. Friday works if you want to come this week. He came on Friday. He came alone. He didn't bring my stepmother, which I hadn't requested but noticed. He sat at a corner table and ate the full tasting menu and didn't talk much during the meal, which I appreciated. Afterward, I came out from the back and sat across from him, and we talked for almost 2 hours. Really talked. In a way we hadn't since I was a child. Maybe since before my mother died and everything shifted. He told me he hadn't understood, when my stepmother came into our lives, that choosing peace with her would cost something with me. He said he thought he could balance it. He said he learned, too slowly, that he hadn't. I didn't forgive him on the spot because forgiveness isn't a spot. It's a direction. But I told him I was willing to face the same direction he was facing, which was more than I'd been willing to say a week ago. My stepmother and I have not spoken about that night. I don't expect we will, not in any real way. She sent a text the week after that, said the dinner had been lovely and the salmon was exceptional. I replied, thank you. I'll pass that along to my chef. That was all. Some relationships don't have a resolution, just a new distance at which they stabilize. My half-sister started following Birch on Instagram. She sent a DM about a month later asking if I'd be willing to grab coffee sometime. We did, at a place near her office, and it was awkward and a little stilted. And at the end, she said she thought it was strange that we'd grown up together and barely knew each other. I said I thought so too. We've had coffee twice more since then. It's something. I spoke at a small business summit in Scottsdale last spring. The panel was called Women Who Built It Anyway, a title I'd found a little on the nose. But the conversation was good. One of the other panelists asked me what I would tell my younger self, the version of me who was just starting out and had very little and was learning to make something from it. I thought about being 12 with a letter on a kitchen table. I thought about the retirement dinner. I thought about my father sitting in the corner of my restaurant eating food I built and staying quiet because sometimes the right response to beauty is silence. I would tell her that the people who overlook you aren't the measure of you, I said. They're just the people who weren't paying attention. And someday, if you keep building, some of them are going to show up at your table and you'll have to decide what you want to do with that. Whether to let them in or not. Whether to give them a seat. Someone in the audience asked, "What did I decide?" I thought about Friday dinners and coffee that's getting easier. I thought about the distance that has settled into something survivable. I decided the table is mine, I said, which means I get to choose who sits at it. That's the thing they never took away. Even when they thought they had, the table was always going to be mine.